Talks.
All right, hello everyone, this is Josh, also known as Yashu. You're tuning into a special edition of TLOY Talks, episode 91. You can get this on all platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Buzzsprout, much more. We're almost to 100, so definitely stay tuned for all the stuff coming in. We just have the Patreon that's also up as well too, so if you want to support like a little bit further, check out like exclusive content here or there. Check out the Patreon, sign up to become a member, like for either tier, and yeah, we're definitely gonna get started right here, you know. So he's a Ukrainian-born Canadian author, most known for his tell-all book "Bad Trips: How I Went from Vice Reporter to International Drug Smuggler," which you can get at any Indigo, any like bookstore like around the city, also like online too from Amazon, all of the platforms too. He's a former editor and reporter at NERSEY, which is like a part of like Vice Media, who's interviewed the likes of Childish Gambino, Top 5, and much more. Made national news in Canada in 2017 after drug smugglers that he recruited was arrested in 2019 and sentenced to 9 years, and has since been released for day parole since April of 2022. He has a podcast called NERSEY along with his colleagues to discuss music and other entertainment cultures. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Slava Pastuk in the building, also known as Slava P. How are you doing today, brother?
Damn, bro, that was a sick intro. Thank you. I'm doing good.
Yeah,
I like how the two artists you picked were Donald Glover and Top 5.
Yeah, I just kind of I think like those like the known ones like that I read from the book too. I don't want to get like too much into the book too because I think like your life story and everything like that has just like been for the book too. So for people who want to tap into that, you can buy the book like on any Amazon or any Indigo and all that.
Sorry. Or just wait, and then it's going to be made into like a 6-part miniseries for Crave. Or like if you can't read.
Yeah, for sure.
I know it's also an audiobook if you can't read, too.
For sure. Or Tubi. Like I think a Tubi movie could.
No, it's actually like slated for Crave. Like they actually picked it up. That was announced last week, I think.
Oh shit! Congratulations. You know.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It's I'm like completely hands off, and they're taking the perspective of Portia, who I don't know anything about. So I'm excited to see what they do with it. But they bought the rights to the books, and they're gonna be doing whatever they.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see too because like when I read the book for the first time too, like back in like 2023, it was like kind of like interesting to see from like the life story from you growing up in like Barrie in Toronto, like dealing like with like life in a homeless like in a shelter and like in other parts of the areas to like even working at like major events, like being at like a lot of like parties back then because you were like a pivotal part like in the Toronto scene from like those like times, and then from what was like escaped like in the news and all that too till now. It's like amazing to see and all that, you know, for your YouTube channel and everything else too. And like I don't want to like ramble too much too because I think we'll get more into that for a bit too, but like I mean even since releasing the book, did life change for you like in a way in terms of like fame and like getting opportunities and so forth?
No, not at all. Like it was always a goal to do something like that, but then once you get it you realize how meaningless it really is. The book, the movie deal, all that stuff, none of it really like matters at the end of the day. I went to trade school and I got like a real job, and that's kind of guided my life a lot more in the last few years than the book or the movie deal has. Not to say that I'm not grateful for those things, because I do feel like it gave me the chance to capture, like you said, a very important time in Toronto. 2015 in Toronto was like pivotal. Everything was going on. Even with what we're seeing happen now in the culture, that's the time that you look back on as the golden age. So I'm really lucky I got to be there and got to be in the same room as a lot of these people. Yeah.
But at least you'll kind of get like royalties from the movie and all that stuff, right?
I don't really know how that works, but no, under Ontario bylaw, you're not allowed to make any money off proceedings of crime. Not allowed to make proceeds off crime. So literally banning this from happening. So the co-writer, Brian Whitney, he's the one who makes money. And then I think my agent does as well.
And even from the book, I guess it's like kind of like the same thing too?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And I mean, with the people that you mentioned in the book too, because like in the book, like it mentioned, you know, your interactions with like Come Down and Plug Pope that are kind of like pivotal people, like in the Toronto scene, like from like 2015 to 2018. So do you still kind of have like a relationship with them in some way?
To varying degrees. I mean, in terms of like, are we regularly speaking? No. Those people that you mentioned, not so much. There are other people from that era of my life that I still do talk to, but I've been pretty selectful with who I have reached back out to since I've been back, just because I did see everything that people said when everything originally transpired. So
No, I definitely know what you mean too, because like I would understand like from some situations if it was like in a criminal matter, like that whole basis of a relationship can't be formed too, like because of like conditions and stuff such like that too. But like with Come Down, which I know right now they're in a different place too, because I think Castro is like focusing more on his music, and then I think Fiji's doing his own thing too. So I would have also like thought that relationship would have like pulled through like in a sense.
those guys have always been really independent guys and have always kind of done what they've wanted. I watched Castro do an interview. Anytime these guys do interviews, like I think Castro sat down with Friday, I watched that whole interview because he was talking about parts of Toronto I remember. So, every event is remembered in different ways. So it's interesting to get as
Yeah.
many perspectives as you can on that time.
Yeah. And I also didn't even know that he was like Jamaican too, like in a bit. Like I thought like he was just like straight up like American and all that, but
Yeah. I mean, Fiji's another interesting character. I think Fiji, when I was at Rolling Loud, Yachty got like he called for Fiji. Fiji was backstage, so I think Fiji, Yachty, Drake, they're all probably like in the same camp and working because those guys are still like creative guys. So it would be a shame if they weren't pursuing their actual like creativity.
ah, for sure, man. Nah, likewise. And I mean to even get more onto like the whole like prison system and all that type of stuff too. Like I know like you speak more about that like on your YouTube channel too, but like with the whole like range system too, because like in Toronto and like any other jail and prison in Canada, it's like kind of like a range system too. So like tell me more about that and how is it like usually like set up like and are there like certain factors to it in a sense too to put certain people like in certain ranges?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was thankful enough to only spend 17 days in Toronto South, which I do feel like is the one of the worst penitentiaries that you could be in. But that is provincial, and provincial houses a lot more people because people are transient; they're in and out of there. That one is absolutely split up ranges by neighborhoods, and then things will change. Like for example, when I landed there, I landed on the Weston Flemo range, and then after that, I went to Joyceville, which is where everybody goes when they get a federal sentence, which is 2 years plus a day. And then I was in Joyceville for 7 months, and someone came from that range. I'm like, oh, is that range still good? And they said, no, apparently something happened on road where Weston and Flemo got into some kind of like dispute. So now that range has to be broken up. So yeah, they're ever changing policies. The people who actually work inside CSC and have to keep tabs on the street politics, they must be the number one consumers of all this Torontology content.
Ah, for sure. Because I know like when you see like Toronto South, like there's like kind of like an upstairs, downstairs area too. So like one floor up, like one floor down.
I think there's 4 floors,
Oh, true.
if I remember right.
And do they have it in like sections in a sense too? Like one range there, one range like in.
Yeah, I mean everything is split up, and you have no idea what's going on next door. I was there a total of 3 ranges because the first time I got arrested and made bail, so I was only in intake. The second time I did intake, and then that Weston Flemo range. So that's a total of 3 ranges, and each kind of varies. Some ranges will be good, so they'll get privileges to, like watch TV till 10 p.m. Other ranges are bad, so they get locked down after 6.
Oh, true. And I mean, for people like, I just want to like get into it for a bit too. So, like, let's say for people like Alec Manassin and like Bruce McArthur, which their cases have been like around like that same time as like your situation, how were like they dealt with like in a jail prison setup, like from an inmate's perspective?
I mean, guys like that who are that high profile get maxed out right away. They don't even see general population just because they're either a target for someone or, I mean, realistically, it's just that the fact that someone will try to earn their stripes by being like, yeah, I stabbed Alex Manassi in jail. Because, like, again, it's a very transient place, Toronto South. So there are people that are in and out of there for a weekend. Like, there's guys who literally make it a job to get arrested with a bunch of Kinder eggs full of weed in their butt, and then they get to jail and then poop them out,
Oh,
and then they make like $3,000 a Kinder egg.
yeah, no, I know what you mean too because I know like
You know what I mean? You did that?
Yeah. No, I mean I just like kind of noticed like from like watching like the videos and all that type of stuff too. So it's like, yeah, it is interesting too. And I think I was like seeing like a director Huss video where I think they were like doing something. This is like for a music video shoot too. So like they were like I think putting in something inside like their like bati hole and all that too. So it's like
Their
kind of like
luggage,
yeah. So, but yeah, no, it is like sort of interesting and confusing to know in a sense too. So,
Yeah, no, that whole aspect of it in Toronto South, it is a little bit sketchier when you're getting stuff like that. When you're in federal, guys will do like drone plays and stuff like that. It's a lot more sophisticated because you are just like outdoors for a majority of the time when you're in federal. So it's a little easier to get stuff. You don't have to smoke stuff that was in someone's butt.
oh, for sure.
Can I ask a quick question?
So-
to jump. You said that high-profile people are like targets.
Yeah.
In prison.
Yeah.
Were you ever a target?
No.
While you were in there?
No, I was never. I'm not really high profile. Like I know that kind of goes against this whole setup and what it looks like, but I'm like really not an important person. It really didn't even strike people like who I was until I got to Joyceville. Actually, that's not true. When I was in Toronto South, you know, Loco City,
Yeah.
I was on range with him and we were in the shower, which I know that sounds crazy, but we're both taking a shower, like stalls apart. And he looks over, he says something about my tattoos. We start talking and he's like, "Oh, what's your name?" And I'm like, "I'm Slava P. I just got arrested." He's like, "Oh, you're Slava P." And he was working with Sam, who's now running Rap Season. She was his manager. And I guess, you know, gossip spread about the fact that I had done what I'd done and got arrested. And so Loco City was on the same range as me then, but nobody really cared. And then when I got to Joyceville, Casper saw me, and Casper had gotten arrested after or before my shit like became public news. So he had no idea what was even happening. He's like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" He thought I was like doing a Vice piece in jail.
Yeah.
So after that, it became a little bit more clear. But even then, I wasn't like high profile. If anything, people were bothering me to like get the story out. They're like, "Yo, you're a journalist, right? Tell them about what they're doing to me. And, like, they're not giving me healthcare and shit like that."
Shout out to my guy Alex for the question too. That will definitely be added too. So yeah. And I mean, like even like with the whole like experience, have you ever noticed like any rappers or public figures that either like went to PC or did they mainly stick to like GP and all that?
No, the complete opposite. If you ever went to PC, it would be a huge tarnish on your reputation in the streets. It would be the worst thing you could do. So guys would max out before they would go to PC, right? Like, I know they were those guys were probably more targets than anyone else. Like, punching Casper probably gives you more points on the street than punching Slava P, right?
Yeah.
But again, all those guys were not only good, but like those guys played the best basketball game I've ever seen in my life around Christmas. There was like an inmate basketball game, one team against the other. And I don't know if they were on the same team, but Tolop and Casper were just, and then there's another guy, Reese? Anyway, he was the guy who did the shooting at the Raptors game. But anyway, these guys were balling out. It was like the most entertaining basketball game I've ever seen. It was like came down to the wire and Casper hit a three right at the buzzer because we have big buzzers that tell us when to go.
Yeah.
Casper hit a three at the buzzer to win the game.
Oh, that's crazy. Like that's actually like probably like one of the dopest stories like I've heard like in a while too. I mean, because I've heard like a story that I think Bugs like was on PC or something like that too, and like I think people kind of exposed him for that for some reason too. Like I don't know if this is like in the East or if it was like in the South too. So
from my knowledge of Bugs and his time inside, he blessed everyone super nice and nobody had nothing bad to say about him in terms of people I interacted with. So I'm not sure. But there are guys who will like check, they won't check in, but they'll max themselves out before they check in.
Okay. And like I mean like at that time it was like only Casper, Tallub, I'm guessing Bundog and like other people too.
Bundog may have been there. I don't even know what he looks like really. So who really knows? I probably would have heard. But the Tallub, Casper, K Money ended up coming as I was leaving. And that's about it for guys who are like rappers. And then guys who are like street dudes, the only one I interact with is like Blueface. Like Moolah shouts him out a lot in songs. Blueface is a guy who's like, he's been in for a minute. And he made his way down to minimum for like a brief period. And I interacted with him there. But like all the guys that you hear in like Driftwood songs, like the Shower Posse guys, those guys are still in, but they're in Collins Bay. Like you were asking about the segregation on the ranges. There's whole penitentiaries that are segregated. So Collins Bay is for like, and again, this might be out of date because I'm talking about what it was in 2020, 2022. But that was like a Jamestown Galloway jail. You don't go to Collins Bay if you're from Driftwood. You go to Driftwood. If you're from Driftwood, you go to the one that Beaver Creek, but Beaver Creek Medium is called something else. God, it's been so long.
There's like the Maplehurst, and then I think
that's like Toronto South.
All right.
Maplehurst is like there's only 5 penitentiaries that house federal. Warkworth, which is in Warkworth, Collins Bay, Bath, Pittsburgh, and then the one I keep forgetting, but it's up in Muskoka with Beaver Creek.
Oh, okay. Oh, see, I see what you mean too. Yeah, no, like it is pretty interesting too because I also had like a female rapper by like the name of like Stu Tisha that talked about the whole like prison conditions and like everything else too, and we also talked about like how her experience was like in prison. Well, not in prison, but like in jail in a sense too. But with like what's going on in like prison jail, like in Ontario, how do you feel about that, especially since it's been like televised, like in like the media, like in a sense too?
Yeah, well, I guess like again, you have to delineate between the jails and the prisons because one is run by the federal government and the other is run by provincial. The story that just came out about them adding more beds to provincial prisons is terrible because they're not making it any bigger. They're just going from 2 beds in a cell to 3 beds in a cell. Federally, and again, my experience is only with minimum security. Prison is not like a barbaric thing once you get to federal. You get to wear your own clothes, you get a TV in your room, you get to cook your own food. Once you get to minimum, at least you get your own clothes throughout the whole thing. But when it's federally treated, it's a little bit more, it's less cruel than it is when it's provincially treated.
Sure. Because I also like read like a news report too that I think someone died like in like I think the Toronto South too. I think there was like a fight and then that person got like knocked out, I think too, and then I think it caused like a mental issue for a bit too with his like system, like his neurological system, and then I think he passed away like days like later and all that too. So
Yeah, I mean that happens. There was a guy that died when I was in Joyceville. He hid his charges. He said he was there on like drugs or something. Turned out he was a pedophile, and guys beat the shit out of him and left him for dead in the washroom.
oh shit.
I didn't see that happen, but it happened at the same time. So
Yeah.
people die in jail, unfortunately.
Yeah. Nah, it's crazy. And like I mean like I've even heard too that I think there's like a lot of like lockdowns that do tend to happen too. Like I was like watching I think CTV and like they had a segment where I think like one prisoner like I think called CTV and then I think basically talked about like how even like the whole like there's like rats and like roaches like around like the like hallways and like beds as well too. So
Yeah, so Toronto South is like fairly newly constructed. I didn't personally see that. I'm sure that is the case in older prisons. If you go to Kingston, you can go see Kingston Pen, which was like, it looks like Alcatraz, like something out of a movie, like
Yeah.
limestone and shit. And it was operational up until 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I'm sure that does exist, but Toronto South is fairly clean. I'll give it that.
oh true. Yeah. Nah, because like I know like because like from your experience you already explained like how the setup is kind of like in it too. Yeah, for me it was just like I think I just kind of like noticed this like when it was like popping more like on the news and all that too and like it is like interesting to like understand too for a bit too. So
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a whole culture around that shit. I don't know how much it makes sense to like really glorify it because at the end of the day, it is jail, and like maybe it is right for people to be scared of it, but people should be scared of like Toronto South. Spending any time there is like terrifying, and it's bad.
Nah.
You should not want that.
for sure, man.
Can I ask another question super quick? Yeah. When you were in jail, did you number one see like any violence like firsthand, and number two, as a journalist, how did you feel about because as a journalist, right, you're going into communities, you're going into people, you're interviewing people, and you hear about all these circumstances secondhand. Yeah. But then like, how did you feel seeing that?
The violence or the effects of the so yeah, seeing the effects of the stuff that you've almost like glamorized or valorized in some fashion, especially like working for Vice, and then you're seeing a guy who's there because he literally like robbed an ATM pharmacy to feed his fentanyl addiction. You're like, oh shit, this is like the other side of like that glorified drug culture. But in terms of like seeing violence, sure, you see a fight, that's normal. You'll see again Joyceville because so we didn't get to this, but when you're going from Toronto South or Maplehurst or whatever, to get to before you're at your mother institution, you have to go to assessment, and everybody goes to assessment. So you can't really separate guys. So that's when guys will either check in or max themselves out. And that's where I saw that basketball game with Casper and Tollop. But that, depending on who's there, what load just came in, during yard, it will look like Gangs of New York, like the start of Gangs of New York, where people are just like waves are crashing into each other and people are just fighting. Because the rule is when you get to assessment, you have to go to the first 3 yards. Like you have to get sussed out. You can't hide out. So if you're there, you're showing face, and people are like, "Oh, I know that guy. That guy snaked me for like canteen money back when I was in Maplehurst a year ago." Guys have long memories when it comes to that type of stuff. So, yeah, violence was a regular thing to witness, really, but nothing like that pedophile story. Like that, it's rare to see death, but it's not rare to see like a black eye or something like that.
Nah, that's facts. Like that's actually pretty like interesting in a way too. And to even get more into like the like just like the more like life after prison situation too. Like you started creating your content for YouTube. Like I think I was like watching the first few videos where you were like doing like shit like journalists say and like videotaping like Rob Ford. It's all good. But how did you get into that, and how was that experience like building your channel and like garnering a fan base and all that?
So I started my YouTube channel for the same reason I started writing about music, and that's just because like I loved concerts and I wanted to remember them more than actually like using my memory. So I started off just with my digital camera, taking video recordings of like the Coachella, the Osheaga with Eminem there. The first OVO Fest where Jay-Z and Eminem came out. I was just like, I need my camera for this. And I was just putting up clips on YouTube. Then I put up one clip of Nicki Minaj giving a fan a lap dance, and somehow it slipped past. This is like early days of YouTube, and somehow it slipped past the AdSense filters, and I was able to make money off this. I made $600 in a month from this video I took at the Buffalo concert of Nicki Minaj giving a guy a lap dance. I guess it like hit the right SEO terms or whatever it needed to. But I was like, oh shit, you can actually make money off this. And that's when I made that, what music journalists say, YouTube.
Yeah.
That was the first one I made. And I made that with some people that I met at a Joe Budden concert that I went to for free because I was writing for a site named TO
Oh, true. Yeah. And then like I kind of noticed it like later on too, even with the whole like Rob Ford situation. And then I think also like with your time like after prison, like talking about like your experience in prison, like your book, everything else too. So like how has like that changed like over time from like the content you made like before versus like now and all that?
Well, the content that I make is just a reflection of where I am in life, right? Like the Rob Ford video was a perfect example. I was just in the right place at the right time. I showed up to the Rivoli because someone gave me a tip that he was going to be there. I'm like, this is going to be very interesting. I didn't know the repercussions I would have down the line, but I showed up, took a video, it did numbers, and I was just taking videos of wherever I was. Like I have one video on my channel from Jeremy Lin hitting the game winner against Toronto. I was watching at Real Sports. I tried to get a ticket, but they didn't have tickets, so I'm watching at the bar beside the ACC. And he hits the game winner, and you can hear half the Real Sports erupt in cheers, and the other half just like boo because the Raptors lost. But people were loving Jeremy Lin.
Yeah.
So my content just reflects whatever I'm doing now. That's why the prison series was just to explain the parts of prison that people might be curious about, especially people who are like going to do time soon. That's like been a really big part of the audience I was hoping to attract.
Yeah, for sure. Because I know like for certain content creators, like even like the whole prison aspect, it's like kind of big more in the States, but like in terms of like Canada, maybe there's like one and few in between that do kind of make that content. I think there's like this one guy, I think from London, that talks more about like the whole like prison culture and like different like prisons and setups as well too. And then I think others, it's like kind of like mandated by like the government too. So like I do kind of notice,
I mean, it's tricky because it's not a very interesting. The Canadian prison system is not particularly interesting when you get to the federal level because they do treat you so humanely. So you don't want to like valorize it. You don't want to be like, oh, this is a walk in the park, because ultimately it is still a punishment. But it's not good content because it's just not interesting. The only video I've actually had that's had success was one where I talked about like the gay stuff that happens in prison, and most of that video was just gay guys who want to fuck me.
Huh. Nah, I definitely.
Like if you read the comments, it is just, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like for me, like when I had like the whole like YouTube channel, like I remembered I kind of created it like I think back in like 2014, 2015, and it was like only for like concert videos and all that type of stuff from like my phone and all that too. And like I wouldn't like notice the changes on like how like monetization is formed too, because from the videos that I had too, like a lot of them like couldn't be like really clear for monetization because of people performing like the songs from backtracks and all that. And then I kind of rerouted it to creating my own content too. And like I noticed like even like how monetization changes, like you'd have to get like 1K subscribers or 500 and like certain watch hours and short hours too.
Yeah.
Versus like before where you could just like drop a video and like, you know, you could get monetized like easily if you can and all that too.
That's the thing. I thought I was still monetized because of that Nicki Minaj incident, but I wasn't. So when my shit started doing numbers, I wasn't even fully monetized until like a month after the fact because I had to hit all those milestones you just mentioned.
Exactly. Was there like ever like content that you regret like deleting like in a sense too?
I've never deleted any content.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, no, there is content that I deleted. Okay, I used to do stand-up and like, yeah, it's like bad stand-up.
Yeah.
So I deleted that stuff because the girlfriend I was dating at the time, she found it and she's like, you have to delete this.
Yeah. Nah, I know what you mean, because like I remember like I would do like the concert videos and all that other type of stuff too. And like I realized like why would I put it on there even though it's like a platform like more like because like for this platform it's like kind of like more like showcasing people from like different walks of life and all that too, and like having like old concert videos like really wouldn't make sense in a way too and all that. So
well, that's my platform has always just been like me. It's just me and my name. I've never tried to like put out anything that I own, any kind of platform like what you have here. So that's a very like Toronto thing where artists would consistently like delete all their old stuff and rebrand and be like, my rapper name is this now.
Yeah.
And that happened at least 3 times with 3 different rappers I can think of in 2015. I don't know if it still happens. I feel like now it's cool to see like the progression. Be like, oh, this is the song that this guy had on his SoundCloud 8 years ago.
Yeah.
This might be an off-base question, but did you ever consider doing content while you were like doing crime and criminal activity?
Yeah, like that's how I was funding like when I was working at NERSEY, that's not a lot of money. So I was selling weed on Grindr on the side, but doing content about the crime, that like realistically, like ideally in a perfect world, the people that went to jail in Australia would have just successfully completed that mission. And then I would have made content about the fact that I had gone and the fact that they had gone and something along that lines for Vice. That was like the original plan. If everything worked out perfectly. So the plan was to do that. Yes. Not to mention all the great like stories that you hear while you're in jail that you're like, oh, this would be a really good movie one day.
Yeah. Nah. And like I know for you, like you have like the whole like NERSEY podcast and all that too. So I think you can only access it from like a certain website too. So how did that like come about, like in a sense?
So NERSEY is me, Drew Millard, and Trey Smith. The 3 of us actually make up the entire span of Noisy. Noisy was a music vertical launched by Vice, and the guy who's in charge of it was a sick guy named Trevor, based out of LA. His first employee was Drew Millard. Drew was getting a bunch of writers together, and he found me because I was writing for Passion Weiss. Shout out to Jeff Weiss, also in LA. Then I'm on the roster, and I'm just online, and I land this Childish Gambino interview. At the exact same time as that, they're opening up an office in Canada, and they're like, we need a Noisy editor. I'm the only guy to be able to do it for like, my contract was for $18,500 for 6 months. And you do the math on that, that's like you would make more money working at McDonald's. Still, to this day and back then. So I took that job. I broke up with my girlfriend. I moved out of like, kind of like this area uptown to move right next to the office so I would have no commute. And I just like buried myself in this job. I'm like, let's see what I can get out of it. And my whole thing has always been like, more people should write about Toronto music. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to write about Toronto music. And like I said, everything worked out really well with the timing because 2015 was such a good time to be writing about that stuff.
Yeah, nah, honestly, I think like it was just a great year in general, like 2016 too. Like, I mean, a little bit of like 2017 as well too, because I think with the music, so I think I spoke with like Gmail about this. It helps like a lot of people from like different scenes like come together, like in a sense too. It wasn't like this like one trick pony type of sound like that everyone's like pushing right now, because you have Jimmy Prime, you have Prime Boys, you have Halal Gang, you have I think G Miller and like Devontae and all those people and all that.
Yeah, you had the Get Home Safe guys.
Yeah.
You had a lot of Sean Leon, Breadway, rest in peace. A lot of those guys were doing different types of sounds that would go on to become different songs on a Travis Scott album.
Yeah. And like a lot of them are like even like performing like at mixes and like certain events too. And like I mean even like Playboy Cardi like brought like Come Down like for the like.
That's such a good example, man. That Playboy Cardi video that everybody references where he has the puka necklaces and he's doing this. That's shot like in a Toronto hotel. You can see every name that you just mentioned earlier in this interview in the background of that video, but somehow we don't big that stuff up and be like, this is a Toronto heritage moment.
Yeah. And I think like the first couple people that kind of like even like as far as like music wise, like they kind of promoted Rap Season, and then I think Side Stage Embrace too. So like
so yeah, Rap Season is that's just an arm of Ink Entertainment, right? So it's not like it's owned by something, right? It's not independent coverage in the same way that Side Door I think is owned by Universal, or they have a deal with Universal.
Yeah.
But all of these I don't know, finding actual independent media is a little bit trickier than it used to be in Toronto. So that's kind of like the double-edged sword of everybody having social media, is like you have a lot of like Six Buzz, Keep Six Solid types. But when you could literally pay to get posted, what is the gate? Like, forget gatekeeping. Like, there is no gate.
Exactly.
Do you feel like that's destroying Toronto heritage?
Yeah. I don't think Toronto, no, the heritage is going to be what it is. I think going forward is going to be tricky because you have to cut through a lot of noise. Like, I find new rappers to listen to because of these pages. But then the larger question is like, how much money is there in music now to begin with? So it's just a new part of Toronto's heritage. I feel like the fact that Six Buzz is like the main character of Toronto from probably like 2017 until now, that's like the most interesting part about it. And one of the best pieces written about Six Buzz was by my former intern, Jabari Weeks, the good intern, the one who didn't do
Yeah,
anything
for sure.
bad.
And like even like talking about the idea of like the growth of like media too, like especially Toronto Canadian like music media too. Like I feel like there have been like a lot of changes from like how it started until now because like I remembered it had like a great peak in like 2015 to 2019 and then kind of trickled down to for a bit too like around the pandemic until now because I think it's like a lot of like
Well,
oversaturation.
the problem is that like all of that media popped up because they thought there was going to be a huge market in Toronto. People thought that Toronto was going to be the next New York, partly because of Drake, but that's the reason that Complex Canada opened an office. Complex Canada was not even like a thing. I think it was just underneath some kind of other publishing arm, and they just had extra advertisements or advertisers that wanted to like target male lifestyle brands. So people overestimated what the market was going to really hit for, and it didn't really perform. Noisy, the website that I love so much that gave me my start, was literally just a brand activation for Bud Light that Vice ran. Vice was like, hey, if you give us enough money, we will give you your own website. And that's what they did. Actually, I think Noisy was Molson, Thump was Bud Light.
Yeah.
And IBM owned Motherboard to begin with. All of these things just started off as like an advertisement platform. Now we're just coming to terms with the fact that there's nothing to like, there's no reason to sell to Canadians. If you sell to Americans, Canadians will just buy that same shit.
Yeah.
So why set up shop in Toronto when you can just accomplish the exact same thing out of your New York office?
Yeah. And I have like noticed that too, like with like a lot of other platforms too, with like in New York and LA, like Dallas, I think is like also like a major like scene like when it comes to media too, because they have like so many platforms like kind of like making out of there, like with Say Cheese, with Real Life 2, with like Mogul Media, and like LA, you have like No Jumper, Passion of the Weast, Fizzler, like all that type of stuff too. Like with Toronto right now, like everyone's like trying to compete to be like that next platform, like even like interview media, like with like We Love Hip Hop, with Gutsy,
Yeah.
with all these like other platforms too. And I've started like to notice that too because now it's like a competition thing to see who's gonna be like on this like platform too, like who can get like the biggest like artists like on the platform and all that.
But well, first of all, whoever gets the biggest artist is not getting them because they're the biggest platform. They're getting it because of past relationships. But the fact that there are all those names that you just listed, not to mention, Jimmy Prime's podcast, Northern Ruckus, not to mention the Steady Mobbin' guys, not to mention Relentless Diaries. There's so many platforms in Toronto, and I think that's great. The fact that Six Buzz still dominates people's mind is just like, I don't know what it's a sign of, but I guess the fact that they're still the main character, maybe they're not as much. Maybe this is like a sign of the fact that the power is displaced because it's not the only platform you can name when you're talking about Toronto anymore. You can name everything that you just named and what I just named.
Yeah. And I feel like there is like unification in certain senses too. Like some platforms can work together, but then like others, it's like, like animosity to like even like just like how we're gonna like present this media, like, like content, all that type of stuff too.
Which is a shame, but I think that a big part of that is because these guys are not doing anything particularly creative. They're just kind of like competing for access. If there's no reason that a really creative idea can come out of Toronto, I would love to see that happening. Unfortunately, like that does happen, and the stuff that comes out is Long Tendo and the Wagwan Delilah guy, Snow Day, who again I love, but it's just that's what ends up breaking through the noise when you give everybody a mic. Yeah. And you can't blame them. People are obviously attracted enough to it for it to make it on the radar.
And I mean, there was like viral moments too with the whole like plush situation. And then I mean, also I think Push the Wall. Like I think that was like the only creative one that they did where they had like people like play video games and like talk about their stuff too. Like I noticed like G Millas, Pillar Bees, all those other people too. And like I think that was like one creative thing. I think the reason why is that like it's just like finding like that right style, like and like the people that are kind of like interesting too, because you're gonna have like artists and other people that might not fit into that vibe too. Like there are artists that will like it, that will play to the side too. I even like tried experimenting on myself too, but others it's like like I just want to have like the sit down thing, serious, all that type of stuff. So
Hey There Delilah by Drake, like really
Wagwan Delilah?
Yeah, Wagwan Delilah really skews, because I heard a take on Instagram from like a local Toronto DJ that it skews our perception of Toronto culture on the world stage.
So, how does it skew our perception on the world? Like, okay,
the perception of Toronto's culture.
Sure, it impacts it, I guess, but like that guy is a Toronto guy. Like Jimmy Prime has this quote from his podcast where he says, "The biggest Toronto man I know is not even like Jamaican; he's a Vietnamese guy." Right? Like talking like that as a joke is kind of like what we do, right? The fact is like all Americans hear is the joke part, and they think that that's just how we talk, but it's not. It's like you watch Letterkenny. You know how they have that little like offhanded way of talking to each other? That's just as much a part of what it means to be from, well, that's more like an Ontario thing. But the Toronto version of that is like speaking a little bit of Somali and a little bit of Jamaican. Yeah. So I feel like it doesn't matter what the world's perception is of Toronto. If we want to be taken seriously, we have to stop looking for approval from America. Like Toronto is the best city in Canada, and Canada is a growing place. So it's second. It's a strong second, but like Toronto is a distant. But that 1 and 2 is a distant. There's a huge chasm between like number 3, which I would say is like Vancouver, and then after that, you only really have 2 places. You got like Halifax and Calgary. So of all those places, Toronto is the best, and we need to like start recognizing that and taking ownership of the fact that like, no, our shit is good, and like we don't need American approval. That's why I'm so pro like go watch something at the Meridian Center, some kind of local act. Go watch the CEBL game. Go support something that doesn't put money in the pockets of an American. Like if you really want to support culture, you have to do more than just complain about people who are trying to do that on their own terms. So
that drove you in your journalist like practices and
sure. I mean, honestly, the question of what is Canadian culture is a question that I've been asking myself nonstop for like since I've come here, really. Like since when you grow up in a new country, because I came here when I was 4. So even though I grew up in the school system of Canada, I was with my mom all the time and I'm telling her what I learned. And it's so different the way history is taught in the Soviet Union versus Canada, obviously, right? So the way that we're taught as Canadians has shaped us into something. But what is that thing? Like, what is Canadian culture? So I don't know where to find that. I tried finding it in the music that we make. I didn't really get an answer there. I tried finding it in jail, and I didn't really get an answer there either. I don't know a single thing that unites everybody in this room, let alone this country, right? Outside of the fact that we're all inhabiting the same space of Canada, there's nothing that makes us Canadian. So that's been a question of mine. And then like, what is Toronto is a different question, but we have to understand too, like Toronto's not that big. I think it's like we're the size of Minnesota and Minneapolis combined, like the Twin Cities. Like we're not Manhattan. We're not California. We're not even like Chicago, really. So we are punching above our weight, but the problem is that we still like are kind of ashamed of it. But that's why this whole Kendrick thing has been really illuminating, because straight up, if you're not on the side of Drake and you're from Toronto, like you can't do that. No, it's just like, what do you do? Move. Like literally move.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like just like the demand with like a lot of like stuff going on too, because like when I noticed like that performance at I think the Forum, like
fuck that, bro. Honestly, I don't even want to talk about Kendrick Lamar because it's such a nothing story. But
you didn't like that performance at the Forum with all the West Coast icons?
Again, like that's so what they united their gangs. That's their problem that they created, that they solved because of Drake. That sounds like Drake actually solved the problem, but whatever. My point is more like people who complain about the city, a lot of times people who say Drake didn't do enough for the city, what they really mean is Drake didn't do enough for me personally. Because I know, man, I could say at least like 5 families, like generations of families whose life got turned upside down because of Drake gave him a feature or Drake gave him a production credit. And they were able to take that and create generational wealth from it. So you can't tell me he hasn't done anything for the city. I know like people who are managers of producers, you know, their whole family is set because Drake gave them one song and they were smart enough to take that and run with it. Yeah. And so for that reason, you can never really badmouth Drake. Did he do anything for me personally? No. He actually did buy the rights to the podcast that I made before I went away, but then they fumbled that and it didn't even get made. Yeah. But briefly, he had the rights to my story.
I could like say the same thing for like Tory Lanez too, because I think Tory Lanez people, like his family, they've done like a lot of like stuff for like Toronto for a bit too. Like I've actually met people who has like there's like family members that own studios that are like kind of like related like to Tory Lanez and all that. Like he has a sister that's like making like music and all that too. Like he has like people that are around him that are like making like money off that bread, like VC and all that, and like some like these stores and like businesses that they have too. Like even with the Weeknd as well too. I think he has like a lot of like people that he puts on like more like in Ottawa, but like there's like others like in Toronto like around that way that are like making money, and like even like there's other artists that are kind of like notable from Drake, from Tory, from The Weeknd and all that.
The Weeknd's a great example because The Weeknd, like the smartest decision he made was not signing the Drake, because he went over to what was at that point CP Records, right? Which was like Masari, and
I think Mia Martina and
yes,
like Danny Fernandez, like
exactly.
those people.
Thank you. You know all the legends. So CP Records became XO because they recognized the talent in the weekend, and they're like, okay, let's double down. Take all of the relationships we have that have allowed us to get Mia Martinez and Danny Fernandez on the radio and use them on someone who's like a global icon.
Yeah.
So that was a really cool story, but it's great to see that type of stuff develop. And yeah, like obviously some people will move out of Toronto and take their money with them, but the wealth that's created through these guys' careers being what they are can't be overstated. Whether it's like, you know, even someone like Daniel Caesar has probably funded large portions of Ontario to be developed in ways that we can't even comprehend.
Yeah. And I mean, history too, like that venue owned by like Drake and all that. I mean, like certain businesses like the Scarborough, like Shooting Stars, like owned by like Drake in a way too, from like Nico, like certain clubs and venues, like all that type of stuff too. Like without like the Toronto music scene and with Drake's existence, there wouldn't really be like a growth, like in a sense too. And like, because like Toronto, like pre-Drake wasn't really anything interesting too, with a lot of people trying to make a name for themselves too, like aside from like a 1-2 artist like right there and all that.
I would say like, oh man, you can't even hear me. How like but that being said, with Drake funding all these like bigger venues and bigger artists, like what about the independent artists who are on the ground performing at like the Block House or some sort of like cipher?
I mean, sure, like that. It would be nice if Drake could help everybody, right? But he chooses to do so based on relationships and probably like a calculation of things that we can't even wrap our minds around. You keep mentioning these OVO guys, and I think that is the best part of what Drake has accomplished is he came up with a crew of guys, gave them all individual tasks. They've each individually excelled at those tasks to the point where now like Nico is the basketball guy, where he took OVO Bounce, which was just like a celebrity event with Brandon Jennings, and now kind of finesse that into CEBL being a thing. You have Future doing the actual DJing, but also being involved in production, and that's the person that was involved in getting my story from Jesse Brown was Future the Prince. You know what? Perfect example. Do you know T-Rex from CTV, like Tyrone Edwards? Yeah. Do you know how he landed the job originally? He was roommates with Future the Prince. So you just have to like be in the room and then be loyal, and the loyalty gets rewarded. People are upset that they weren't in that room. I get it. Like I'm upset too that like I wasn't at the right place at the right time. But you can't live with that like constant regret of like, oh, well, what if I had been here? Well, you weren't, and you have to figure out a way to cut through the noise. Yeah. Like all those publications that you mentioned earlier, not to go back, you know, New York, they have that interview where it's just a guy talking to a Metro card on the subway. That's genius. Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that? Hey, my friend, English or Spanish? If you move, you're gay. Why can't we do that? Why can't we do that in Eaton Center? People need to adapt with the times. And that's really it. Like Toronto just needs to move faster. That's, I think, the biggest problem.
Even when I try to do certain content, like when other people try to do certain content too, you're not gonna get someone who has like this like hardened like image or who has like this whole too cool for school image to do something like kind of out of like their picture because they don't want to be seen like in a certain like too.
A lot of guys are afraid of looking dumb too. To be honest with you, this is a problem I had. This is why I always prefer to do my interviews written, because I was able to clean up guys' answers to make them sound a lot better than it sounded at the time.
Yeah.
And that's why I would never really be comfortable doing artist interviews like this, because I would be always trying to make sure that the person like is killing it, right? Because you don't want the other person to look dumb. That was a big thing Vice and Noisy would do a lot of, is like the Chief Keef the Childish Gambino interview, where like Chief Keef kind of looks like he doesn't want to be there, and it's just a super awkward thing. And like that's not entertaining to me.
And I think like certain interviews too, like I've seen with like Bootleg Kev when he asks like questions to like ESTG like about like football and all that type of stuff too. And like you'll have like this artist that doesn't really want to do that too. And like, I mean, a lot of it stems from like societal issues. Like, I mean, it has improved with like maybe like platforms like No Jumper and Academics too, but like a lot of them, like they do have to go back to these like areas, these neighborhoods too. And, you know, they have to meet up the same people like that they have to put this like hard image to. So like when they do come to an environment where they can like relax like a little bit too, like it can like test the waters in a way and all that.
Well, that's why streaming culture is so interesting to me, because it's just a guy in his room, right? Like the person doesn't really have to go outside and interact with the world. There's that clip or that screenshot from when academics, when the Drake beef was happening and he showed his inbox and it's like all Uber Eats receipts. Because that's all this guy does is he's just in his room streaming, talking to a chat. And yeah, that's how he probably earns a lot of money doing that.
Exactly.
But it takes a very specific type of person to be accustomed to that and be happy with that. And I know that me personally, I wouldn't want to listen to what that person has to say about a lot of issues because they don't live a type of life that I would want for myself. So why would I listen to what they do?
Sure. And I have like a question, like more so about like the whole NERSEY thing too, because like you have it only on the website too. As far as like YouTube, like why didn't you put like some like the NERSEY content like on like that YouTube channel, like in a way?
So we're not really even sure what NERSEY is or is going to be. Really, like it's just it's a way for us to reclaim Noisy first and foremost. There's going to be a lot of opportunities going forward. Every episode we put out sets a new record for most people that watched it or listened to it. But ultimately, like the whole online content creator space is in a weird space right now. Not just from the perspective of like, are people going to watch stuff, but like, is there any money left to be made? You know, YouTube has moved to shorts. We've made the move to shorts, and as you probably know, like there's not a lot of money in shorts. There's money in long form, sure, but as the kind of mood goes towards infinite scroll, quick consumable videos, there's less money in that. There's less ads in that, right? Which kind of makes sense because like when you're on TikTok and you see an ad, you're immediately swiping away. Whereas you're watching a long form YouTube video and that banner will be there for like a minute before you close it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even like the way like people put out content too with like IG versus YouTube too, like that's why like I push more like on YouTube and Patreon too, because you could post something on IG too, but like it's not like you're gonna make money off that or monetize it unless like you're branded like content with like another like promoter and all that, or someone with a brand like in a sense too, because I feel like it all depends on like how you're using like social media like effectively too. Like others tend to use IG just like for that one time post and that's it, but others they're gonna have to treat it like a business like in some way, shape, or form, you know. So
yeah, you know what? That's interesting because realistically, maybe I should try that. Maybe I should get in contact with Keep Six Solid and Six Buzz and all these other sixes, and we can all do like a 6-person cross post about some kind of thing. Because realistically, that's all you need, right? You just need like enough people to gain that initial momentum. But unfortunately, like the product I'm selling is a book, and probably not the demographic I'd be wanting to reach with those pages.
Yo, off-base question.
What's up?
Do you remember anything from the growing up in the Soviet Union?
I remember the color gray. I went back there a few times. It's not great, and it's really just like very yeah, not a lot to be honest with you, because I moved when I was 4, so I don't have any like strong childhood memories, especially because right after that it was like learn a whole new language, culture, everything. Well, culture, but yeah, I mean, I remember like being in Victoria Park a little bit. Like I remember the apartment we grew up in. But before that one, my mom says we were at like right on Spadina, and I have no memory of that whatsoever. She's like, yeah, we were like right by the bank. I'm like, yeah, I don't remember that is. But I remember the Victoria Park one. I remember living in Eastdale, stuff like that, but no real memories of Soviet Russia, no.
for sure. And I think it's like an interesting way to like even get onto this topic right now, because I think we only have a few topics left. So how do you feel about the whole like immigration and unemployment situation happening in all of like Canada right now?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It sucks, but like, I think the real problem is that you can come here and there's ways to kind of like skirt around the right way of doing things. I think a 29-year-old coming here as a student to learn how to do event marketing at a college in Brampton that's in a strip mall is probably not going to be destined for long-term success in this country. I feel like this country is, it helps out people who need it. That's the nice thing about it. But you do still have to work here. And not to say that people are lazy, but when you don't have the opportunity to do real work and the only job that you can get is like gig work or shit, it's going to be worse for you. And I'm interested to see how things develop. It feels like right now we're at a real tipping point insofar as both sides getting fed up. Like I said, I'm in Brampton, so every weekend I see a march or some kind of park organized protest. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know. like Canada's huge. I feel like realistically, the fact that in my entire lifetime of living here, we have not developed infrastructure beyond the cities that we mentioned earlier, that's a huge loss. We should have had a metropolis in Sudbury right now connected via high-speed train so you can get to Toronto from Sudbury in an hour. And the fact that we haven't isn't the fault of immigrants. It's the fault of the people who have been in charge for my entire lifetime.
Yeah. And I think like it all stems from like the idea of like how political parties like move and all that too, because in Toronto you've had like various like mayors like go on too, from like the John Tories, the Mel Lastmans, the Rob Fords, like Olivia Chow's, like everything else too. And like it's like more of like a slow burn process than anything too, because like they're handling like different matters than ever too, because like
it feels like nobody's responsible for anything. It's like, oh, that's a city problem. No, it's a province problem. You ask the province, it's a city problem. Nobody's ever taking the blame for anything. So yeah, we will see how it develops, but I feel like people will be a little bit frustrated.
Someone who had to learn a new language from a communist country, like, and had to come and adjust to this culture and the North American capitalist way of moving. What did you want to see as you were growing up? What kind of programs did you want to see?
Man, I never wanted for anything. Like more like understanding a better idea of like Canada's history would have been cool. You don't really have access to that in school. Like if you think about what they teach us in history class, that differs from like American history. We get maybe a little bit of like Louis Riel or things of that nature. Like, do you know the story of Louis Riel? Like, you guys are younger than me, so you a little bit more experience with high school. Yeah, really cool story. Like really interesting. If he was American, there would be like 7 movies made about him by now. I feel like really we don't do a good enough job of bigging up the cool stories that we do have. Even like with this story, this is an interesting enough story. Like I thought something would have happened already by now, but it took all this time to get some kind of anyway. But the point is, if you look at other people like the 4 Y'all guys, their show just went up last year. Just Rain's show, that just went up last year. These guys have been in the scene for like 10 years. And only now are they getting like traditional support from, there's only 2 players when it comes to that, Rogers and Bell, right? Like if you want to really have a career in what you're doing now, you have to go for work for one of those companies at some point in your career. There's no way around that. And that hasn't changed in my lifetime either. So I don't really feel like Canada's like not really like a super capitalist country. It's like more of a, it's still like every big company is one step removed from the government, more or less. Right? So that kind of makes it closer to like a vaguely communist country than you think.
Yeah. And I feel like they do tend to pander towards like the Commonwealth too, because like with Canada, it's still like under a British Commonwealth in some cases too. So like
we suck America's dick way harder than Britain's. We don't really even like do anything British anymore. People don't fuck with the Queen or the royal family. That's not that's not a thing that you have to be if you want to be Canadian.
Yeah.
But you do have to like know who Kim Kardashian is if you want to go to high school in Toronto. Like that's fucking America. That's not.
I mean, we still have the Royal Guards though, so like
where?
Like I don't know, Parliament Hill.
Okay, that's like one place in Canada that people don't like. Yeah,
center of power.
Yeah, but that's a figurehead thing. It's like the Vatican Army, right? But your actual like day to day, the life of the average American impacts you much more than the life of an average person from the UK.
No, exactly. And I mean, also with like how like even music is like portrayed now, because too, like you have like the free labels that are under like American and like major like labels, Universal, Sony, Warner, and all that too. And like they're still like handling like Sad Boy's career right now, because she's now getting the fame too from the song, even though she made it as like Ebony back in like 2017, 2018 under the same label like Universal too. So it's like usually like a slow burn process for Canadian artists too.
Sometimes Canadian artists will have developmental deals too. So an artist will pay for their lifestyle for a couple of years so that they go out there, they show face at parties, they become like the wild Prince of Toronto city kid. And then it's like, oh, and I rap too, and I have this thing coming out, and I have budget for a graphic artist. Let me go get the cool graphic artist who does all the posters. That's something I saw a lot of too in that time.
Oh, for sure. I want to ask like, like this like one quick question too. So who are you like currently like listening to like right now?
Like from Toronto?
Yeah,
or just generally?
Toronto or general, like.
So K Money, I've been listening to everything that he's been putting out recently. I will like just put on Northside Benji and put it on shuffle when I'm driving around. When I'm at the gym, I'll put Pengs on, put it on shuffle. I really like Bully. That Made in Austria tape is amazing. But Pengs was such a cool thing to experience because that whole Griselda Blanco came out while I was in jail. So someone had come in, like the same kid who had good things to say about Bugs actually. And he was like, yeah, Pengs just got locked. I'm like, who's Pengs? He's like, the Griselda Blanco song. And I had been in jail for like a year and a half at that point. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, what do you mean? Cardi B was going to be on it. I'm like, what the fuck? finally I hear it. I'm like, okay, I can understand what the hype's all about. And then since then, being out and kind of like going online and seeing the Toronto content, it's like, oh, people have been like talking about YG. And I just heard about YG because he was next door. I never actually met him, but he was next door to the place I was at.
Yeah, for sure. And like there are like a lot of like new cats as well too that I could like recommend too. There's like this guy named like Straight Cash, dope rapper. He just I think dropped a third or fourth song too, which is like going viral right now. I mean Haji Basto too.
Haji Basto's nice. I like Haji Basto. Yeah,
100 OTT, like he dropped like his project as well too. Like that was like also pretty nice. As far as like
I said, I listen to anything Keep Six Solid.
Yeah.
I feel like I trust them a little bit more than Six Buzz, but whatever Keep Six Solid posts on Twitter, I will listen to. That's like the last good part of Twitter. Is like that's like this. They're bringing back that like ignorant Twitter that I used to love back in the day.
Yeah,
that doesn't exist anymore.
Sure. And like Torontology as well too. I feel like they have good like recommendations for music as well too. So
yes, I think I learned about Haji Basto on Torontology. But yeah.
What brought you into a love of hip hop?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, because I was like growing up in a new country, I gravitated to things that were also new. So rock music was like very intimidating because there's so much history that you have to learn to be able to enjoy a current artist. And you know, you see that older guys are fans of these artists. You're like, this is intimidating. I'm just going to see whatever the newest thing was. BET was a channel that I would always watch when I would come home after school in Barrie. And this was like the Snap Crunk era. So all the songs were just like ridiculous and fun and so accessible and easy to get into. And that's just kind of what like attracted me to hip hop, is that it felt like something that you can kind of like tangibly become in a way that you couldn't with other genres. Plus it was fun. Plus I like basketball, and really just like the fashion behind all that stuff, the lifestyle, really. Like people call it the culture. I really call it more of a lifestyle because it is for sale, right? Like skateboard culture was probably like another competing culture. But hip hop and skateboard culture are still youth culture. Hip hop, I don't know, maybe not as much anymore. But skateboarding is always youthful, right? Like same with hip hop. It's always a youthful thing. It's always for the kids.
Where do you feel like the genre is going next?
I don't really care, dude. Like that's the thing. I'm 34 years old. It can go wherever it wants. Like I don't know. It's not for me to decide, and it's not for me to like hold on to. The whole beauty of hip hop is you enjoy it when you're young, and then you kind of go, "Oof, that was crazy." Because like I'm sure that, you know, I listen to there's no better album than whatever your favorite album was when you were 16 to 18 years old. And you can never be convinced otherwise. You never at 34 be like, oh, I'm getting really into like Lil Wayne. No, you have to have already been into Lil Wayne like at the time. And that's what I had. Carter 3 was when I was like coming out of high school. That was like the shit. So that's what Carter 3 fed into, like just listening to everything Wayne put out, which led to the Young Money compilation, which is where I heard Drake for the first time on Ransom, which is like, oh, this guy's from Toronto? And I had no idea who he was. And then you do the Knowledge. And then I listened to the Still Fly remix.
I think so, yeah.
That's like one of my favorite Drake songs. And I was listening to that shit in Barrie. And he's rapping about places in Toronto. He's like, fuck about the Soho. I know where the Soho Hotel is, right? Like you drive by that to get into the city. So it was just a cool confluence where like I was already into hip hop. And then Drake comes out, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to move to Toronto. And I moved to Toronto, doing the marketing job, writing about concerts on the side, work for Vice, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm here.
For sure, man. And, you know, just to kind of like end it off right now too, like aside from like the movie that's like coming up, like do you have
six-part
Oh, the 6-part series.
Yeah.
Choo.
On Crave.
For sure. What else do you have going on right now in terms of like any other projects and so forth, you know?
Honestly, there's nothing in the pipeline. Like I said, I work a trades job, so it's that pretty much takes up my entire day. Maybe at some point this part of my life will be made into something, who knows? In terms of content, there's nothing coming down the pipeline. There's no more prison videos. I've said everything I had to say about that. You know, there's always like these ideas that you may have. You're like, oh, maybe I'll do a camping video where I like go and like only use Bitcoin and then record it. And it's like, yeah, maybe. But like, that sounds like a lot of work. And you don't want to be the asshole at the campsite setting up tripods and shit. So I don't know. Like we'll really see where technology develops. If at some point the technology develops to like just have your own personal drone beside you, like a third person video, maybe I'll do some content.
Can I drop a plumber like Oh,
Yeah.
Trader is?
Yeah.
Drop a plug for that.
Oh, nah, stay out of it. I'm gatekeeping that shit.
Sure.
Go learn
And-
code.
Sure. Sure. Yo, just like one quick thing. Like I know like you don't like really promote your social media too for people to like not follow and all that too. So I guess just to not have like too many like people like texting you and all that.
No, it's just straight up like I don't like being on my phone very much. And the more reasons I have to be on my phone, the worse. Plus, like the real benefit of social media is not for people to show you love, is to like hate on other people. Like really the power of Twitter and Instagram is like I could fuck up someone's like 15 minutes if I just said and be like, you fucking suck, dude.
Yeah.
And then that person has to read like, oh, a new message. What? Oh, I fucking suck. And then they have to think about that for 30 seconds. That's the power of social media.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's why I don't want people having my
Yeah.
shit.
Nah, for sure. Because like I've asked like a lot of people too, like about their thoughts on social media, and like I always like give this thought, like, you know, people will post something, but then it's not really a real reflection of how they really are. Because like you could post like you're on a boat, but then you're gonna be like in an empty condo, like upset, eating like ramen noodles like the next day and all that too. So
Yeah.
it's really just like an illusion sometimes too. And then Twitter, it's like, or X, you know, you're tweeting some shit and then, you know, you don't know if it's going to be canceled or screenshotted or anything like that too. So
Well, that's it. That's why the best thing you can do online is hate. Like that
Yeah.
is the main currency of being online. If you are online looking for love, you're a loser. You have to be online actively hating and participating in the
Yeah.
downfall of others. Like straight up at this point, if you're not like I'm just online to hate on the West Coast and LA and every single rapper
Yeah.
that's ever come out of that.
for sure. And like even like, you know,
Fuck
people
Tupac.
like force feeding like content to watch like other BS and all that too. And it's like, do I have to really watch this today and all that? So yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like it ends up feeling like work. It's like, okay, let me see what my podcast section is saying. Like, oh fuck, there's like 4 shows that came out. That's like 4 hours of my day, which is nice sometimes. But then when you fall behind, you're like, fuck, like I have homework.
Nah, for sure, man. And I mean, do you have any like closing remarks you'd like to say and all that?
No, man, honestly, thanks for having me up. It's really cool to talk to young creators who are like trying to do something interesting in the city. And it's very cool that you invited me to be up here. Thank you, all you guys.
Yeah, for sure, man. Slava, like, it was like dope having you, you know, having like this crazy like conversation too. I wish I would have had a feedback for this too, because like shout out to Alex with the questions too. Like it wasn't like really planned. Like I thought it was like an observation type thing, but he pulled through with some of the questions too. So shout out to Alex for
Shout out
that
to
too.
Alex, yeah.
And you know, this is Josh, also known as Yashu, episode 91 of the TLOY Talks podcast with the legendary Slava P and all that too.
Relax with that word. Just a guy. Just a guy.
I mean, you can get this like on all platforms too. I'm not gonna like say it like one more time too, but like you'll know if you know. Definitely check out the rest of the episodes too coming up. Check out the Patreon, everything else too, and we're just signing off right now.
You don't have like a sign off, like a witty like.
Yashu
out.
Yeah, I mean, I just say Josh, also known as Yashu, signing off, but I'll just do this.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, there was like moments I had to take off my shades for it too because I